The Papal Nuncio, I am very touched by your message this morning on behalf of the diplomatic corps, extending your wishes to the French nation. I'm all the more touched that you have had the responsibility to convey this message, because I do not forget, I cannot forget, after the tragedies we've had, the attitude adopted by the Pope and the words of the Pope, notably after the assassination of the priest in Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray. I personally wished to meet him last August to tell him how deeply the French, whatever their beliefs, were moved by his words of comfort. Here we are together today because you represent all the nations of the world. And France is a country which has a global responsibility, which is derived from its status as a permanent member of the Security Council, but also derived from its history and its status and its determination and its will to contribute to the development of security and peace. For nearly 5 years, with Laurent Fabius and Jean-Marc Ayrault, I have been responsible for France's foreign policy in a context featuring deep changes, upheavals, which each of us has to come to terms with. First of all, terrorism. It's not something new, but terrorism has taken on an intensity of form which have led us to fight against it and to try and understand what it is, the determination to destroy what we represent. France has been attacked several times, and the same applies to many other countries represented here. Israel, Germany, and Turkey have been attacked by terrorists. Islamist terrorism has conquered territories, and this is a new fact, a new reality. Territories in Iraq, in Syria, and they continue to mobilize young people from many other countries. Then there is the persistent crisis in the Middle East. Here again, it's not something new, but it has taken on an intensity that we've never experienced before in recent years, leading to one of the worst humanitarian disasters in recent decades, with millions of people thrown out onto the streets and roads of exile. In Syria, the war has had caused 300,000 victims. War crimes have been committed, using chemical weapons as well for the first time since decades, during which such weapons of destruction had not been used. In Eastern Europe, the basic principles of collective security for 70 years have been called into question by the annexation of Crimea. In this unstable and dangerous world, in this uncertain world, France has taken her responsibilities. In Mali, we intervened in January 2013, and we have prevented the country from falling into the hands of the jihadists. Today, we have more efforts to make in order to fully implement the Algiers Accord and to ensure the security of the entire Sahel region. This will be one of the topics of the Bamako conference, which will be opening in Bamako, bringing together France and all African countries that will be represented by some 30 heads of state and of government. France, in 2014, also took the initiative to bring all the countries around Lake Chad around a table to find a solution to the behavior of Boko Haram, who had just kidnapped young women and massacred civilians. Our cooperation, the multilateral action that we took in conjunction with the countries concerned, has led to the decline in Boko Haram and to decisive reversals of Boko Haram. And we also intervened in Central Africa, the Sangaris operation, which prevented mass crimes from being committed and made it possible for a political solution to be found with the election of a president of the Republic. And we must do everything we can to help this country, which is one of the poorest in the world, to enjoy stability, to return to stability. And then there's what's happening in Iraq and Syria. France has participated since the summer of 2014 in the international coalition against Islamic State. In Iraq, this operation has made it possible, thanks also and above all to the Iraqi forces fighting on the ground to reconquer a lot of the territory lost. Today, the Islamic State is retreating everywhere, and our aim is to chase Islamic State out of Mosul, where they had hoped to set up the capital of their caliphate. I visited Mosul a few days ago, and I believe that it is possible, thanks to the joint action of the coalition under the Iraqi forces and the Peshmergas, the Kurdish Peshmergas, to liberate Mosul before the coming summer. But we will have to go further than this and also liberate Raqqa in Syria. There, too, we know that out of Raqqa, in Raqqa, attacks carried out by the terrorists in France and probably in other terrorist acts committed were carefully planned and managed out of Raqqa. It is therefore an obligation not only simply to eradicate a group of criminals who are threatening the security of the region, the first objective, but also to protect Europe from what this group may undertake against its own citizens. I'd like to go back to the Syrian tragedy. This tragedy has lasted for nearly 6 years. So it has been a failure. A moral failure, a political failure on the part of the international community. I remain convinced that it would have been possible to put an end to this tragedy much earlier. A key date will remain in the history books as the turning point, the summer of 2013. It had been demonstrated, proved, that chemical weapons had been used by the regime. This was the red line which had been traced, which had been set, and the transgression of this red line was not punished as it should have been. As a result of this international inaction, France was prepared to intervene at that time. The worst consequences ensued. The worst consequence, the emergence of the Islamic State, which was already present, but which hadn't developed as much as today. The flow of refugees, which had already started significantly, which hadn't as yet achieved the scale that we have had today. And then the destruction of the human heritage, and worst of all, the massacres of civilians. Because this decision was not taken, then events took a very negative turn. Now we have to discuss with Bashar al-Assad. It is the same people who broke relations with him in 2011 who ask us to do so. I have always said that he is not the solution to the problem that he has caused. It's not just a moral issue, although moral issues are important. It's a question of lucidity. I have always asserted that a political transition in Syria was necessary and that it called for all players in the region to be involved and should be involved in the discussions, including the regime. France is in favor of any initiative that will make it possible to put an end to hostilities And that is the reason for which we voted in favor of the resolution submitted by Russia following the ceasefire which it submitted with Turkey. But we cannot stop there. The negotiations must resume as quickly as possible. They must be carried out under the aegis of the United Nations and in the framework set in 2012 in Geneva. The parameters have already been set. It is therefore high time to bring together all the stakeholders, except the fundamentalists and extremist groups, and to act in the framework of Geneva. We must also involve all the regional stakeholders, and I exclude none of them. I have always held the view that we must talk to Iran. I was the first Western head of state in 2013 to meet President Rouhani. I also hosted a meeting with him here in Paris. But I have also always clearly asserted that France is a partner with Gulf states and intends to remain a partner of the Gulf states, who have an indispensable role to play in solving the crisis in the Middle East and for the balance of the Middle East. And this is what the Arab states meant when they invited me to their summit meeting in 2015. I'm also very concerned by the situation in Libya. Tensions within the Presidential Council, the lack of a genuine dialogue between East and West are major risks. First of all, for the Libyans themselves, who are once again and for too long facing a situation of great insecurity. But it's also an opportunity for the terrorists, although they have suffered some reversals, notably in Sirte. Every time chaos is extended, the terrorists take advantage of this. It is also an opportunity for traffickers of all kinds to carry out their awful business, the first victims of which are the migrants. And the information available to us shows that migrations have not ceased in spite of the winter and despite the considerable risks taken, because these traffickers have made it their business to a very profitable business and enables them also to finance their terrorist activities. Therefore, the Sarraj government must be supported in its efforts to unify the country, and a dialogue must be encouraged between him and General Haftar, so that the Libyan National Army can be fully integrated into the institutions of Libya, which is for us a priority. I would like to underscore the risks. I mentioned Syria, Libya. The partition cannot be a solution. France is working in favor of the integrity of the countries that are victims of such crises. It would be too easy a solution to ethnicize certain territories, to separate one group from another, and to get rid of borders which were established in the past. For terrorists, this would give them an opportunity to exploit the mix-up and to continue their terrible actions. I am not in favor of partitioning Libya and Syria, nor can I accept the status quo. I don't think these conflicts can be settled out independently. And that's why France has taken an initiative to hold a conference on the Near East, which will be held on Sunday. The aim is to get the support of the international community for the two-state solution. This two-state solution must remain the benchmark, the reference. Unfortunately, there has been a weakening in the field and in people's mind regarding this two-state model. If we let this two-state model decline, it will increase the risk for the security of Israel. We are very much attached to Israel's security. At the same time, I am lucid regarding the the potential of this conference. Peace will be achieved by the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves and by nobody else. Only bilateral negotiations will be successful. Next Sunday's meeting is there to remind everybody of the importance of the two-state solution and to advance concrete solutions in terms of energy infrastructures, urban developments, transport infrastructures for the benefit of the Palestinians and the Israelis, and to encourage more exchanges between civil societies. That is the contribution I hope Sunday's conference will make. But we must be aware of the fact that the persistence of this conflict creates not only in the region itself, but across the whole of the world, it creates a feeling, a sense of weakening of the international community. We must bring back raise the sense of responsibility of the international community. It has shown that it is capable of doing so in other areas where more serious problems exist. I'm thinking of the negotiation on climate change, for example. There too, France took her responsibilities, not only by hosting the conference in early December 2015, but also because, thanks to the support of many countries represented here today, we were able to get a historic agreement at the end of this top-level conference. And within a year of its adoption, this agreement has been ratified by over 100 states. And I assert it again strongly and clearly and frankly, nobody will be able to call into question this agreement. On the contrary, it must be fully complied with, and in terms of the contributions of the states, the success of the coalitions, and for mobilizing the necessary funding. And it is with this in mind that I wanted to give a fresh impulse to France's development policy by a reform, by bringing together various French players, the Caisse de dépôt, the National French Development Association, to mobilize 12 billion euros every year, 5 of which dedicated to climate change. And I would also like to thank the Parliament for increasing public aid for development and mobilizing new financial resources, such as the tax on financial transactions. France's priority, and this has been asserted across the whole of Europe, is Africa. Africa is a continent with a great future, but it's also a continent that is facing serious threats to its security. So we have high hopes for the development of Africa, but Africa needs to be supported in order to ensure its own security. We must also help Africans to have access to energy. That's the reason why France has mobilized 10 billion euros in favor of renewable sources of energy. We complemented by providing support for education, the fight against pandemics, and a cause to which I am particularly attached, access of everybody to innovative medicines. We are facing serious health scourges of all kinds, and we know that pandemics don't stop at the borders of countries, and they even spread from one continent to another. So we are under the obligation to act against the health scourges and to allow everybody to have access to medicine. Your Excellencies, I'd like to remind you of something which is evident, but which is also our will, our position, which we defend intransigently, very strongly. The strength of France in the world is based on her independence. This independence is derived from France's history, but also from the decisions that were made by my predecessors who have left their traces and which have ensured a degree of continuity. And this is what has inspired me when I wish to engage in a dialogue with our major partners. A few days before the end of President Obama's mandate, I would like, first of all, to express our friendship for him and to pay tribute to the quality of the relationship we've had with the United States of America. Together, we have negotiated, not only France and the United States, there were several other states. We negotiated together the agreement on nuclear energy, nuclear weapons with Iran. This agreement must be preserved. We have worked hand in hand to obtain the signing of the Treaty on Climate. There were differences of views, notably in Syria in the summer of 2013. But the transatlantic partnership remains intact for the defense of Europe, and we are jointly determined determined to fight against terrorism. We have shown great solidarity with each other. France will, for the United States, will always be a reliable ally, but I would also like to make it clear we will retain our autonomy in our decision-making, and France will always act with the sense of freedom. We sometimes will take up different positions if they are in line with our values and with our positions. Russia is also a partner for France. We have an old friendship with Russia, and we also share a number of interests. Many times I have met Vladimir Putin, and I've talked to him in order to review all the crises we are facing. But I have never thought that it would be possible to find an answer to these crises without the involvement of Russia. And we have proven this in a number of areas, notably the agreement on Iran. But I could also talk about Ukraine. And that's the reason we did take an initiative with Chancellor Angela Merkel to draw up the Normandy formula in order to find a solution to preserve peace on our borders. And it is in that framework that we signed the Minsk agreements. But they are not being fully implemented. And we are, at every time we meet states in the Normandy formula or by telephone, we always express our enthusiasm and our commitment and our involvement in the implementation of the Minsk agreements. And at the same time, and I would like to say so clearly, the sanctions cannot be lifted until all the commitments have been abided to and applied by all the parties to the agreement. But here again, may I say that I'm convinced, that I remain convinced on the basis of my experience. It's not just a question of repeating the principle that we must talk to Russia. We have never ceased talking to Russia. Problems will not disappear simply because we discuss them. That would be so easy. That would be too simple. But there is an active diplomacy which is being conducted. Dialogue is essential, but it must respect our interests and our principles. And this is what led me not to deliver the naval vessels which Russia had ordered from us, which could have been used, these warships could have been used in recent months. So this decision, did not reduce France's credibility in terms of its relationship with Russia, nor in terms of the quality of France's signature, in terms of France's credibility as when it signs export contracts, such as the Rafale contract. And France has also found buyers for the Mistral warships. I have always thought that France can continue defending principles without sacrificing any of its interests. Over recent years, I have traveled a lot, and I would like to thank all those who have contributed to the success of these meetings, of these trips, notably by creating new institutions in each country, sending special envoys, forming commissions, bringing together eminent people representing the countries who are willing to engage in strategic partnerships with us. And I'm delighted to see the efficiency, the effectiveness of these initiatives and the development of these initiatives. In Asia, we have consolidated, the foreign minister has just been, we have strengthened our strategic partnership with Asia. And I remember Prime Minister Modi had invited me for his National Day, and I was very honored to attend the Indian National Day. With China, our relations are much more stable than they were a few years ago. And this is the result of the efforts on both sides to establish with this great country, notably on the occasion of the anniversary of France's recognition of China, of the Popular Republic of China, we have been able to support China in its role on the international stage. And China did play a major role in the negotiations on climate change. We have also developed our cooperation in the fields of culture and innovation. And we intend to strengthen our ties with all the countries in the Pacific Ocean. I carried out the first state visit by a French president to Australia. The Minister of Defense went to Australia at Christmas time, and it was a Christmas gift. Australians made us a present by showing their trust by signing a major contract for submarines, which will commit ourselves for decades to the future of Australia. In Vietnam, which President Chirac had visited, I also wanted to visit Vietnam. We have historic ties with Vietnam, and above all, we have developed our economic ties with Vietnam, as we intend to continue doing so in Southeast Asia. I will be going to Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia in the next few months. With Latin America, France has deep ties. I have visited Latin America a dozen times, and even visiting states where no French president had ever been, Peru, Uruguay. In a few days' time, I will be in Chile, Colombia, to support the efforts made by President Santos to implement the agreement with the FARC, which France has always supported. I mentioned France's sense of independence. It is the opposite of isolationism and of protectionism. France is attached to her sovereignty. France knows that that is the best way France can serve the construction of Europe. Europe, in recent years, has had to face a number of crises. It's almost a daily reality. The Eurozone was threatened with a breakup. The Eurozone has now been stabilized, although we are still concerned about the situation in Greece. But the situation has improved compared with last year. We also have had the experience of the big influx of migrants, which jeopardized European solidarity. The EU did manage to find various solutions, border guards, centers to register migrants and refugees, procedures to facilitate their return to their countries of origin, and the agreement with Turkey. But unfortunately, many of these solutions arrived too late, although they are being implemented now. Europe is facing a much more serious crisis than the crisis of an economic nature or of the influx of migrants who must be treated in a human way. The crisis that affects Europe affects the very basis, the very foundations of the European project. On the 23rd of June, 2016, the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. It's the first time a member state, and not the smallest one, the country which has always counted in our history, and which geographically is very much part of Europe. But for the first time, a major member state decides to leave the European Union. All the consequences have to be drawn from this in terms of swift opening of negotiations in March and in terms of deciding on the future of the European Union with 27 member states. We have an important date in March in Rome. It will be the 60th anniversary of the treaty that established the common market. We therefore have to look at the prospects for the future. What basic principles should we apply? First of all, respect for nation-states. The European idea cannot be in contradiction with the legitimacy of sovereign nations. Second principle, solidarity. Each country cannot simply claim rights and look only to its priorities' interests. That's the national selfishness, which has nothing to do with sovereignty. And this attitude, which I see, unfortunately, all too often, it is in the behavior of a number of European countries. This could lead to the breakup of the European Union, because it will be the end of solidarity. Each country would be only interested in a return on its investment and want to obtain gains without thinking of a joint project. The third basic principle is the principle of subsidiarity, which must set the priorities that Europe must pursue, while leaving each state free to act at the level that is appropriate. Having defined those principles, what are Europe's objectives? First objective, protection. This means that we must have our borders.
You have been listening to French President François Hollande there giving his New Year's